Hi everyone, this is James from F9 Audio and the Freemasons, and welcome to this quick walkthrough video of our brand new sample pack release, Minneapolis Funk, featuring Guy Pratt. You'll have heard in the intro an awful lot of the music from the pack, but let me quickly show you exactly what's so special about this release. When we were actually coming to format the pack, we had an option of either putting together Apple loops, Rex files and all the standard additional time-orientated and chopping-orientated formats. But to be honest, it was actually going to double the size of the pack and make the download fairly enormous, and sometimes that can get unreliable. So we had a bit of a brainwave and we've come up with this brand new system we call Riffmatic. And basically every single part, every keyboard riff, every guitar riff, and most importantly, all of Guy's bass riffs are all chopped up and ready to play across the keyboard. Here's an example running in Kontakt. For Kontakt users, we've generated a custom GUI and a few simple controls to allow you to kind of dig in and actually create some effects out of some of the chopped up instruments. But don't worry if you don't have Kontakt, we've already formatted these in EXS24, Reason's NNXT, Cubase's Halion, and Pro Tools' Structure format. Users of Ableton, we've recently found out that you can actually import EXS24 patches perfectly into Simpler or Sampler. This pack covers the electric funk that was coming out of Minneapolis in the mid-80s, but that doesn't mean you have to make funk productions with it. Here I've got a 116 BPM small new disco production that's showing off what you can do with some of the main audio files of the pack and the Riffmatic instruments working in tandem. So let's play through the main section of this production and I'll show you how I pieced it together afterwards. So this entire piece is pretty much based around just one of the samples from the pack. And when I say samples, what we've tried to do here, Guy and I, is create pieces of music instead of just 1 or 2 bar loops. 1 or 2 bar loops are great if your music is just hanging around one note, but funk and all this kind of thing relies a little bit more on the parts working together. So let me quickly show you how we did this. So it's always, this track is always building up to this section. And here it is with the rest of the production. Now, when we pieced this entire pack together, I was very careful to make sure that we bounced sections of the music mixed and all fitting together without any of the drums. Because when I was sampling back in the 90s, certainly going through disco records and old funk records myself, you were always looking for the bits where it would kind of break down to instrumental. And the classic version of that is obviously Music Sounds Better With You, which is the front of Fate by Shaka Khan. And finding those kind of just musical sections was almost like the holy grail. So what we've tried to do here on every single part of this pack is give you pre-mixed samples that you can dive in and find your own magic bits. And here's what you do when you start chopping it up. Now, whilst I'm here, I do want to kind of throw in as many tips as possible. And this is a question that came up a few times on the F9 Twitter account just recently. How do you get the kind of crunchy, old-style house, low-sampled, low-bitrate kind of effect without it being obliterating the music that you're doing? Well, say we wanted to add it to this sound. There it is in its full glory, 24-bit audio, sounding brilliant. But we may want to add a little bit of this. And here's the effects chain that we're generating here. So I'm rolling quite a bit of the bottom end off using a high-pass filter in Logic Standard EQ. Then I'm bit crushing, nothing spectacular here. I'm taking it down to 10-bit, downsampling 3 or 4 times. A little bit more roll-off. You sometimes need some of the lower harmonics just to trigger the correct bit crushing effect, but you don't want them in the overall signal. And then I'm using a phaser or a flanger. And here I've got D16 Group's amazing new Antrasol stereo flanger. It copies the BBD chips, which are the bucket bridge delay chips of the old analog phasers. It sounds fantastic. It's available on the Plugin Boutique website as well. A bit of that, and then just some general compression to keep it all under control. But listen to what happens when I add them together. This middle one here, in case you're wondering, is just a little bit of kind of filtered delay just to add some extra ambience. So let's go back to the front of the track, and I've got a filtered bass loop, which is literally just a kind of half-bar chop of one part of the later samples. And let me just show you exactly what it sounds like without the filter. I'm using Cytomic's Excellent the Drop filter for this. And to do the pump, where obviously in that kind of thing, you've got an awful lot of flabby bass knocking around. So you want to make sure that you can get some sidechain action just to get out of the way of the kick. I'm using the Cable Guys Volume Shaper 4, which has just turned into my favourite plugin for doing this. I've always loved the Cable Guys stuff. You've got wonderful, beautiful control over the actual sidechain curve there and some great modulation options. It's very much worth having in your arsenal, this one. Great mix control. I can show you how severe it gets. So great for this kind of thing. But that will just also show you the power of using some of these pre-mixed and mastered versions of the actual music. Now just above it we've got this section of vocoder. Now, yet again, that's been chopped out of one of the kind of full sections of music. Another little tip here on Logic, that if you take off the beat sync on the auto filter and whack the LFO modulation speed right up, it gets into the hearing range, and it gets up to about 4,000 or 5,000 hertz, I think. You add a tiny bit of that, and you can get these fantastic modulation effects. I just quickly want to talk about the 808 rim sound that's in this breakdown. The sound is from a very special kit that we've developed for this actual pack, but for this we went completely genre specific. This has been through the correct preamps for the actual time, the correct amount of non-lin reverb on each sound, the correct amount of EQ and kind of parallel compression to bring it up to a modern form. It's great fun, and here's a little example. We've got a little bit of extra non-lin reverb on here. So whilst we're here, let's talk about some of the other drum sounds in this pack. Here's a tom patch. Now, we've tried to get that level of authenticity and on-genre perfection for every single drum sound in this pack, and they are all available set up as menu samplers as well in all of the formats that we described earlier. But most importantly, we took particular care and attention on how we recorded and processed those drum sounds. We went back to the original machines where that was possible, and we preamped them through classic hardware. For example, we're lucky enough to have a Neve 1081 in the studio with some classic SSL channel strips and GML compression. Then we were actually processing them in the same kind of way that they would be back there, using the correct non-linear reverbs or room ambiances that were incredibly popular at the time, the right amount of distortions to bring them up to modern day, and the results are quite stunning. We're really pleased with some of the sounds in this collection. For example, let me show you the kick and snares. But now for the fun stuff, and for me it's the Riffmatic instruments that have made this pack so much fun to use. Here's a quick example of how you can use them just coming out of this breakdown into the next drop. All of those kind of staccato music chops are just from one of the Riffmatic patches. And that's literally just me randomly hitting stuff and then quantizing it. I'll show you what I mean. I'll actually keep the thing live. And we'll just muck around in this section. I've got auto quantize on. Let's just play that back. Now, one of my favourite parts of the Riffmatic instruments are the guitars. For years, people always used to say in Freemasons records, oh, you got these little bits of funky guitar. How did you actually get them? What we used to do is take sample packs to pieces and actually go through, set samples all up in the same key, and then actually chop them up and lay them up across the keyboard. Here, we've kind of done that process for you. Let me just play back some of the samples on here. But because there's timing information and little riff parts in the actual samples, it's easy to get little grooves going. And here I'm using the Kontakt instrument, and there's a little beautiful extra function here. Because of the time stretch mode that all of the Riffmatic samples are set up in, you can pull them to pieces to either change the tempo or for effects. Now, if you need to reset the stretch at any point, just command click and it will go back to its central position. This will pretty much happen for any of the dials. Need to thank Ruben Cornell for actually finding that little bit of script information for me. The Minneapolis pack pretty much comes in two main keys and two main tempos. All the 116 BPM samples are in E. Now, there's a reason why we tend to work in E for funk, and that is it is the lowest note that you can reach on a bass guitar. So it's brilliant to actually get down there and get that resonance. Any producers of heavy bass music will know that also E has a kind of magic resonance in clubs and just in the kind of human aspect of hearing. So anything around there is pretty tasty. The 110 BPM samples are either F sharp or in B. So there's a kind of little spread of keys, but the great thing is it means that we can take sections from different parts of the music of the pack and actually use them together. And that's what's happening at this section here. And over here you've got a whole series of kind of rhythmatic instruments playing parts that aren't from this original piece but work perfectly together because they're in the same tempo and key. Now, just a few notes about the other parts of this demo. Some of the core drums, like the kick and the hi-hat, are from our Drum TRAX series of products. They're available on Loopmasters as well. That's from Volume 1, and these are from a forthcoming pack of new disco drums. When you mix them together, you can get a really, really solid rhythm track very quickly. But apart from that, absolutely every single sound is made up of the instruments and the sampled sections from the actual Minneapolis Funk pack. Now, just a few notes about the mastering of this demo, and this is an EQ that I'm reaching for every single day. I can't pronounce the company name, got no idea why they called it this, EOS, whatever. It's the Air EQ Premium, and it's got brilliant top and bottom air and earth bands. Let me show you what you can achieve with this in a mastering scenario by just tweaking this top air band. Now, on compression duties, I'm always using IK Multimedia's TR Bus Compressor. This is their version of the SSL EQ. It's got a fantastic high-pass filter on it, and it's been on pretty much everything we've done at the studio for the last 2 years. It really digs in and does what the SSL desk compressor does, and it's better, in my opinion, than an awful lot of the other copies out there. And then limiting duties, well, no one can beat a bit of fab filter, can they? Just really taken over certain parts of mix processing for an awful lot of people. And certainly for me, the Pro L that was introduced to me by the guys at Wired Masters just is brilliant for this kind of thing where you just want to fire and forget. One last little tip whilst we're here, always make sure that the final output of your limiter is just dropped slightly from digital full scale, something like minus 0.4 dB or even up to minus 0.7 dB. This will make any compressed format of audio, including YouTube and SoundCloud, MP3 and AAC, sound much better. Every single professional mastering engineer will do this to your audio, and it's a great habit to get into. So I hope you've enjoyed this walkthrough. If you make something fantastic with the pack, let us know on the F9 Twitter account, and we'll see you next time.